It begins with a presidential tweet, an economic declaration of war against America's closest ally. In response to US tariffs, President Trump draws a line in the sand. But across the border, Canada doesn't just fire back, it changes the game entirely. Prime Minister Mark Carney unveils a massive 1.2 billion Canadian dollars industrial strategy to shield his nation's vital lumber industry. Suddenly, a trade dispute over wood is sending shockwaves toward the one place it could hurt American families the most, the housing market. How did a fight over forests become a direct threat to the American dream? For decades, the North American economy was built on a simple premise: partnership. Nowhere was this more visible than in the housing market. American builders, fueling the nation's growth, came to rely on a steady, predictable flow of high-quality softwood lumber from the vast forests of Canada. It was a perfectly integrated supply chain, a multi-billion-dollar testament to cross-border cooperation. This symbiotic relationship kept construction costs stable and made the dream of home ownership attainable for millions. The border, for all intents and purposes, was just a line on a map. But beneath this stable surface, a deep-seated conflict has festered for over 40 years. The softwood lumber dispute is the original sin of US-Canada trade relations. American lumber producers have long argued that Canada's system of selling timber from government-owned land constitutes an unfair subsidy. They claim these government-set stumpage fees allow Canadian mills to flood the US market with cheap wood, undercutting American competitors and costing American jobs. Canada has always countered that its system is simply a different way of managing natural resources, not a trade-distorting subsidy. This fundamental disagreement has led to recurring cycles of bitter disputes, temporary truces, and punitive tariffs, each one leaving deeper scars and setting the stage for the next, more explosive confrontation. The long, simmering dispute erupted into a full-blown crisis with a single social media post. Ahead of a crucial meeting with his Canadian counterpart, President Donald Trump launched a rhetorical broadside, publicly declaring that the United States didn't need its northern neighbor's key exports. It was a classic Trump maneuver, a raw, high-pressure tactic designed to intimidate and force concessions. This wasn't just casual rhetoric, it was the public face of an aggressive economic strategy. The administration had already hit Canadian softwood lumber with punishing anti-dumping and countervailing duties, arguing that these tariffs were essential to level the playing field for American mills. From the White House's perspective, this was a defensive action. They painted a picture of an American industry under siege from a flood of unfairly subsidized Canadian wood. The tariffs were framed as a necessary tool to protect American jobs and force Canada to abandon what the US considered to be predatory trade practices. The core of the American argument centered on the idea of fairness. Why, they asked, should US companies that own their own timberland or buy wood at market rates have to compete with Canadian firms that get their supply from government lands at what they allege are artificially low prices? This narrative resonated powerfully in timber-producing states where communities felt left behind by global trade. The Trump administration harnessed this grievance, turning it into a cornerstone of its America First agenda. The goal was simple and direct: inflict enough economic pain on the Canadian lumber industry to force Ottawa to dismantle its pricing system or face being shut out of the US market. The social media outburst was the final turn of the screw, a public declaration that the US was prepared to sever the supply chain entirely if it didn't get its way. It was a high-stakes bet that Canada, heavily reliant on its southern neighbor, would have no choice but to fold. But Ottawa didn't fold. It didn't even flinch. On August 5, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped before the nation and turned the tables on Washington. In a stunning, strategic counter-move, he announced that Canada was not just going to endure the tariffs, it was going to invest its way through them. The government unveiled a massive $700 million for loan guarantees, effectively acting as a government-backed shield to help Canadian companies absorb the financial shock of the US duties. It ensured that even with the tariffs, these companies would have the capital to continue operating, paying their workers, and investing in their mills. It was a direct neutralization of Trump's primary weapon. The other $500 million Canadian dollars was even more forward-looking. It was earmarked for helping Canadian companies develop new, innovative wood products and, crucially, to diversify their markets away from the United States. This was Canada declaring it would no longer be held hostage by the whims of its unpredictable neighbor. The message was clear. If the US market was going to be unreliable, Canada would use its resources to build new trade relationships across the Pacific and the Atlantic. Carney then delivered a pointed warning, noting that Canada was one of the largest foreign investors in the US economy. He cautioned that if the trade hostility continued, that investment, which supports thousands of American jobs, could be at risk. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that economic pain can travel in both directions. In one bold stroke, Canada had transformed itself from a target into a strategic player, fighting back not with angry rhetoric, but with a billion-dollar plan for economic independence. And so, the confrontation enters a dangerous new phase. Trump's strategy of pure pressure has backfired. Instead of crippling the Canadian lumber industry, his tariffs have triggered a massive government investment that will make it more resilient and competitive in the long run. He is now locked in a stalemate. If he doubles down and increases the tariffs, he risks further insulating the Canadian industry and driving them to other markets while inflicting even greater pain on American consumers. If he backs down, he will be seen as having lost the confrontation he started. For Canada, the path is also fraught with risk. The $1.2 billion package is a major gamble, and there is no guarantee that new markets can replace the sheer scale of US demand quickly. Both leaders are now in a standoff where neither can afford to lose, and the North American supply chain is caught in the crossfire. For communities across Canada, from the coast of British Columbia to the forests of Quebec, the US tariffs are more than a headline. They are an existential threat. In these towns, the sawmill is the heart. It provides the high-paying jobs that fund the schools, the hospital, and the local businesses. When Washington imposed its duties, it sent a wave of profound uncertainty through these communities. Mill operators, faced with a sudden and massive tax on their main product, were forced to consider scaling back production, canceling shifts, and putting investment plans on hold. The fear of layoffs became a constant, nagging presence. Prime Minister Carney's $1.2 billion Canadian dollar aid package was a shot of adrenaline. The loan guarantees provided immediate relief, a buffer that allowed many mills to keep their doors open and their workers employed through the initial shock. More importantly, the package provided a sense of hope and control. The $500 million Canadian dollars dedicated to market diversification and product development wasn't just money, it was a plan for the future. It signaled that Canada was not content to remain a victim of American trade policy. For the workers, it meant their government was fighting for them, investing in their skills and their industry's long-term survival. While the fear of the trade war remains, it is now mixed with a sense of defiance. These communities are on the front lines, bearing the immediate cost of the dispute, but they are also the direct beneficiaries of a national strategy designed to turn a crisis into an opportunity for reinvention. The cost is high, but the investment has given them a fighting chance. But the weapon Trump fired at Canada is now exploding in his own backyard. The American housing market, a critical engine of the US economy, runs on Canadian lumber. For years, American homebuilders have relied on the steady supply of Canadian spruce, pine, and fir to frame the homes that shelter millions of families. When the tariffs hit, the price of this essential building material skyrocketed. For a home builder, this isn't an abstract economic concept. It's a sudden, massive increase in their single biggest material cost. A project that was profitable one week became a money-losing proposition the next. This creates an impossible choice: Either absorb the costs and risk going out of business, or pass them on to the buyer. The inevitable result is that the cost of the American dream goes up. The tariffs meant to punish Canadian mills are now directly punishing American families, adding thousands of dollars to the price tag of a new home. In a market already facing challenges, this can be the breaking point, pushing home ownership just out of reach for countless buyers. While some argue that builders can simply switch to domestic lumber, the reality is not so simple. U.S. mills do not have the capacity to meet the nation's entire demand overnight. This supply crunch only drives prices higher. The very policy intended to protect American industry is now threatening to slow down the construction sector, kill jobs, and make the housing affordability crisis even worse. It's a textbook example of a trade war's collateral damage. A fight that began with tariffs has escalated into a battle of national industrial strategy. A presidential tweet met with $1 billion gambit has pushed the world's most integrated supply chain to the breaking point, with Canada investing in a future less dependent on its southern neighbor, and the U.S. housing market caught in the crossfire. The economic landscape of North America is being fundamentally reshaped before our eyes. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.